everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Band of Books podcast, episode 123. And coming to you, not even live anymore, from our bunkers, deep in the rural upper Midwest, is Christopher Gillespie.
Correct. Only 3 cases in the county, so and no new cases since Friday.
And I am Donovan Riley, and we have none to speak of so far.
Yeah.
And for our animal-human hybrid overlords in the future who have conquered all diseases, as I learned from Star Trek The Next Generation, which was then retconned by Picard.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Because that's what people are doing nowadays, is retconning all of my favorite shows because they're unhappy and nihilistic, which segues nicely into Nietzsche.
It's a brilliant future, but also depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, what was it? Oh, it was on Picard, right? Where, they have the replicator so they can get whatever they want. And then, this is a spoiler if you haven't watched Picard, but we don't really...
Don't. By the way, P.S. Don't.
I enjoyed it.
It's bad writing, bad directing.
He visited Riker, who also directed that episode, so now you're criticizing.
I am.
Jonathan
Frakes. I am criticizing him.
Anyway, he makes a real pizza with real tomatoes, and there's a whole scene about, wow, they do taste different. Well, of course they taste different.
Of course. Just like fake meat tastes differently than real meat.
This friend of mine went to Trader Joe's, and there was no meat left except for the plant-based meat. Which is
that's not meat.
An oxymoron.
Stop calling it meat. Yeah,
plant-based meat product. It's like cheese food.
Yeah, go watch the best of Ron Swanson on YouTube and about the vegan bacon episode.
That's good. I just watched the engagement party, and and he's at the buffet, and the only thing on his plate is the bacon wrapped shrimp.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
He's looking at everything else with a scowl. He's got a plate of bacon wrapped shrimp.
That's right.
Like, you're my spirit animal, I think.
He really is. The longer I live, the more Ron Swanson and I become the same person.
Because he's not even a libertarian. What is he? I mean,
American.
He's American.
He's an American.
Frontiersman, right?
That's right, frontiersman.
With gold buried in his yard.
That's right. Non-disclosed locations.
Oh, I've said too much.
Because when his ex-wife comes back and she's like, I couldn't find any of your gold. He's like, did you actually think I would bury it where I said I would bury it?
So good.
Yeah, but we digress. So back to the episode. This is Nietzsche. This is the Antichrist. And this is Aphorism 16.
Why did he call it that, by the way? Well, he didn't call it that. His sister did, but I wonder why.
His sister or the publisher. Because it's provocative, right?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean,
it's provocative.
She was a believer of sorts. Probably the sort of believer we talked about in the last episode, more of the moralistic, deistic kind of approach.
Yeah.
So, but she does, she probably prints the work because he's popular and money.
Well, it probably pays for the medical bills, for example.
That's true. Yeah.
To take care of him.
Right.
If nothing else. Plus, he had some sponsors and donors, which was typical in those days. If you were an intellectual, you had to have donors.
Patrons,
thank you. And so there's that too, to bring in money.
Well, and like we talked about, I mean, he does seem to be pretty intensely anti-Christian at least on the surface. And I'd say
this is at the end of his life too.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have the encroachment of senility and dementia. He is also older. He's fought the fight. He's had his battles. He's been beat up a lot in public, in the press. He wasn't a popular person in that sense, in his generation anyways.
And the Christianity that he was trained in, that he was taught, has had little to no value to him. And it has actually been counterproductive for him.
Right, exactly. And you look at someone like Kierkegaard, who is very similar to Nietzsche in a certain sense, in a certain way, but then in another way, Kierkegaard kept faith throughout his life. Yeah. But at his death, Kierkegaard demanded to receive the sacrament from a lay person and not a clergy member because he considered them to all be spiritually bankrupt.
We talked about that, yeah.
Yeah, and so whether you're a person of faith or a person of unbelief, in Nietzsche's case, in this time, you weren't that far apart in your critique of the church in Denmark or Germany or wherever it may be.
I mean, I don't think I'd want Nietzsche in the pew in my congregation, but somebody a little bit more moderate than Nietzsche, but who's still very critical.
Well, I don't think a guy like Nietzsche would stay very long.
Oh, that's true. But if you could get somebody that actually questioned the things that you said. Yeah, like a Kierkegaard who keeps you on your toes, asks the hard questions, asks the questions that everybody wants to ask, but nobody's willing to because they're worried about,
Correct. Right.
appearances and that kind of thing.
Right.
Kind of the guy that nobody loves, except for the pastor, because the pastor's like, this is the guy that really sharpens the tools for me.
Exactly. Keeps me on my toes.
Mm-hmm. Keeps it real, actually.
Yeah.
To Nietzsche's credit. And to think about how do these words have anything to do with reality, like we talked about in the last episode.
Well, and in both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche's case, since I'm thinking about it, they didn't have a backstop. There wasn't an alternative necessarily for them. Like when we read Saze had the German Free Church, the Lutheran Free Churches, to retreat to when the German church in general, with the evangelical church in Germany, when they made that agreement at Bodbul, where the German church just became kind of this generic Protestant church.
Right.
But the churches retained their Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, UCC designation. But theologically, they were all essentially the same.
And he has friends in the confessing church as well.
Right.
Maybe didn't agree with him entirely, but at least people who...
There was an option.
Well, people who held that Christ and the scriptures had some authority.
Right. It's like the Finnish church today. Like in the Finnish church or the Swedish or the Norwegian churches, there's the state church, and then there's essentially what are outlaw churches.
Right.
But Nietzsche didn't necessarily have that.
Nothing
there wasn't somewhere for him to go when he was little. His dad was a pastor. And there wasn't somewhere for him to go when he was at university, because they were all teaching the same thing that he'd grown up hearing. There wasn't a backstop. There wasn't an option for him. There wasn't necessarily a conversation to be had, even amongst Christians.
I suppose that's true maybe even for some of our listeners, that they have to drive great distance maybe to find a faithful preacher, teacher, congregation, or confession of faith. But generally in the U.S., I imagine that there's still somewhere. It's not going to be necessarily one tradition. I mean, we of course would encourage Lutheran in theory. In actual practice, you're going to have to evaluate every Lutheran church before you make any commitment there, because it's a branding.
Absolutely.
But it's not a franchise. You're not going to find the same thing at every place.
Right.
Yeah. And you may actually find a more faithful preacher at Episcopalian or a Presbyterian, or,
It's true.
It's unfortunate, but it's true.
Yeah. That's America, baby.
That's America.
American civil religion. So let's dive into Aphorism 16 then, because this is, to the point, a criticism of the Christian concept of God, which Nietzsche writes leads inevitably to the same conclusion. A nation that still believes in itself holds fast to its own God. And there it is. American civil religion, like German civil religion in Nietzsche's time, was just that. It was the religion of the society. If you were in government and you were a politician, this was your religion. If you were a lay member of a church, this was your religion. If you were a pastor or a priest, this was your religion.
Right. It's all bound up. Politics and church all bound up.
Yeah. And there were variations on a theme. Like you said, this is a branding matter. It's not a franchising matter. Mm-hmm. And so you could go to the Presbyterian church and the Lutheran church and hear the exact same sermon, possibly sing the exact same hymns.
Yeah.
Have a slightly different actually, there wasn't even a different teaching at this time between the Presbyterians and Lutherans on the Lord's Supper, for example, or baptism. It was purely spiritualized.
Well, I mean, in his context, he's not going to have Presbyterians, but he's going to have Reformed.
Right, more Reformed, thank you.
Sure.
But as far as piety goes, basically same too.
Yeah.
With slight variance.
Right. Well, we've talked about like the architectural change, even in Lutheran churches, where the pulpit's moved front and center and the table's put off to the side.
Right.
It's a pretty good indication of what's changed as far as what's done, what's received.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For those of you listening, in the old days, the font used to be front and center, right in the center of everything, and the pulpit was off to the side.
Well, and I think I've talked about this. It's probably been a long time that the Lutherans, in particular, when they took the old Roman Church and brought it in, they moved the font into the sanctuary and actually made baptism part of the public worship of the church. Right. So
yeah, it hadn't been before.
No, it was off private matter and done in a side room, baptistry.
Yeah, a little baptistry, a little side chapel there, a little side action. Pay me,
secret,
give me a little bit of extra.
Secret rite, almost.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So what ends up happening then is, for Nietzsche, the Christian concept of God, and again, this was published in the late 1880s, right?
1888.
Yeah. A nation that believes in itself holds fast to its own God. This reminds me also of Lincoln's response following the Civil War about, which side is God on? Or maybe it was during the Civil War. And Lincoln's famous response was, we shouldn't be asking whose side God is on, but rather we should be asking if we're on God's side. Is that a nation that believes itself to be a God-fearing nation or godly nation assumes, usually uncritically in my experience, that God is always on their side and blesses whatever they do. And it allows you to get away with a lot of moral, what do you want to call them? Moral rule bending or blurring of the lines, because this is God's country, this is God's people, and therefore whatever we do is morally good.
Right.
We are blessed by God.
You become a God to yourself.
You become a God to yourself, and that's his point. God bless Germany, and God bless its people, which basically opens up the possibility for the Kaiser, for example, at this time.
To be God's representative.
To be God's representative on earth. It's called emperor worship. It's old stuff. It's been around for a while.
And the nation is the God.
And a nation is the God. And therefore your worship in your churches on Sunday will reflect this.
I saw what was it? Like a church registry from 1918 during the flu pandemic.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were noting, services canceled, for like 4 weeks or something like that, due to flu. It said it right in the book. But what I didn't see anybody comment on this, is the last service that they had before they canceled services for the flu, it actually was listed in this book. I think it was in Pennsylvania. It says Patriotic service.
There you go.
On Sunday.
Right.
And it was like in, I don't know, it wasn't July. It wasn't like July 4th. It wasn't Memorial Day. It was just like some weird time, like October. Patriotic service. Right. You're like, what? But that's American religion, we would say civil religion being, being imported right there into the church. Like, well, right. God and country, I suppose.
In our current hymnal, we have an entire section for society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have vocation, which is great. Christian home education. We have patriotic hymns.
It's not a very long section.
It's not a very long section, but it's in there.
There is a little bit of a hat tip there, yeah.
A little hat tip. And it used to just be called the patriotic section.
Called patriotic songs, I think is what it said in the old hymnal. Yeah.
Exactly. Where they didn't even try and hide it, because that was just the assumption.
Well, in 1941,
exactly.
A German church, this is kind of...
being patriotic was kind of important.
We had to make sure we said exactly why we put these songs in the book.
That's right, exactly. But it just goes... And the point, I guess, is every generation, every nation state struggles with this.
Yep.
And usually actually gives in to the temptation.
Well... I'm thinking about like the way that our founders of the U.S., they're talking about needing some kind of moral compass to make a free democratic society work, and lacking, even a deistic moral compass, at least somebody to direct. This experiment's not going to work. That was their assertion. I think we're seeing that play out now. It's like we lost some bearing. I mean, we didn't from the nation's perspective. It really didn't matter what faith so much as long as it was not amoral.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because then it just serves as some kind of, Ten Commandments on the courthouse kind of thing.
Judeo-Christian ethic, the golden rule.
It provides some structure, some backbone, because the Constitution can't mandate morality.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we try to make it do that, I suppose.
Right.
Right. But this is the point. I mean, even for Germany at Nietzsche's time, is like, it's not an option to divorce religion from the state. We have to have some kind of religious import, or we lack guidance for why we do what we do.
Right. You want to listen to this in present tense. Jordan Peterson does a bang-up job of discussing why this is important.
Oh, yeah.
And what happens as a consequence of removing that ethic.
Right. And he does it in a very secular way, although he's well-versed in the Christian tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking at it, it's right over here. How many rules for life?
12.
Yeah. 12 rules for life. I mean,
yeah.
And from just a humanistic perspective, perfect sense. Makes complete sense.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly.
And it's had great benefit. He'll talk about that, right?
Right.
On society.
Right. Exactly.
And is that the church's job? I guess that's the question.
Yeah. Well, for Nietzsche, the answer is no.
Because as a matter of fact, they're going to do it worse. And it's going to have the opposite
Well, we discussed
effect.
that, in the last episode with Aphorism 15. Christian morality and Christian religion basically sets up this land of make-believe.
Mm-hmm. Where you won't call a thing what it is. You turn it
upside down. It ruins society, actually.
Luther would actually call it being a theologian of glory.
Yeah, he would. Exactly.
Because you have to lie about everything that you're experiencing.
Yes. Yep. So a nation that still believes in itself holds fast to its own God. In him, it does honor to the conditions which enable it to survive, to its virtues. It projects its joy in itself, its feeling of power, into a being to whom one may offer thanks. This is the golden calf. That's all it is. It's Nebuchadnezzar's God.
Kneel before the flag. Yeah.
Right. He who is rich will give of his riches. A proud people need a God to whom they can make sacrifices, and that's the thing right there.
Isn't it?
It's all about sacrifice and making the right kind of sacrifice.
For the state.
For the state, for your society, for your community, for your family, for yourself. But it's all about me. Either me as an individual or me writ large. So religion within these limits is a form of gratitude. A man is grateful for his own existence. To that end, he needs a God.
Someone to give thanks.
Exactly.
Okay.
Such a God must be able to work both benefits and injuries. He must be able to play either friend or foe. He is wondered at for the good he does, as well as for the evil he does. But the castration against all nature of such a God, making him a God of goodness alone, would be contrary to human inclination. Mankind has just as much need for an evil God as for a good God. It doesn't have to thank mere tolerance and humanitarianism for its own existence. What would be the value of a God who knew nothing of anger, revenge, envy, scorn, cunning, and violence? Who had perhaps never experienced the rapturous ardors of victory and of destruction? No one would understand such a God. Why should anyone want him? True enough, when a nation is on the downward path, when it feels its belief in its own future, its hope of freedom slipping from it, when it begins to see submission as a first necessity and the virtues of submission as measures of self-preservation, then it must overhaul its God. He then becomes a hypocrite, timorous, demure. He counsels peace of soul, hate no more, leniency, love of friend and foe. He moralizes endlessly. He creeps into every private virtue. He becomes the God of every man. He becomes a private citizen, a cosmopolitan. Formerly, he represented a people, the strength of a people, everything aggressive and thirsty for power in the soul of a people. Now he is simply the good God. The truth is that there is no other alternative for gods. Either they are the will to power, in which case they are national gods, or incapacity for power, in which case they have to be good. He just described right now.
Isn't that something?
He literally just described the United States, March 16th, 2020.
You have to do what is best for everyone else.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you are immoral.
Yeah.
You're destroying the peace. You hate your neighbor. And it's defined by the CDC.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that the response to disease is inappropriate. I mean, that you should respond to disease and limit its spread and that kind of thing.
But just listen to this, right? True enough, when a nation is on the downward path, when it feels its belief in its own future, its hope of freedom slipping away from it, when it begins to see submission as a first necessity, and the virtues of submission as measures of self-preservation, then it must overhaul its God. Think about cancel culture.
Yeah.
Think about social media mobs.
Right.
Think about Antifa and activist groups.
And it's changing rapidly.
And it changes rapidly because of the need for self-preservation and the
need for self-preservation, but also for the nation God. We'll just call it that. To actually be moral in our own image. I guess we'll put it that way.
Right.
To do what is best for each person.
It then becomes a hypocrite, timorous and demure, counsels peace of soul, don't hate anybody anymore. It preaches leniency and love of both friend and foe. Love in quotes, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Love, whatever that love is in a submissive sense.
Tells you what you must do, who you must be, what you must accept.
And this will then creep into every private virtue too. Not only will you be affected socially when you're out in public by this, but then in private, you're going to start talking this way and acting this way too.
So you're thinking more than just the viral outbreak. You're thinking just this, how did we get here? 10 years and everything has changed,
Right.
It's like,
not just 10 years, 3 years.
Yeah, it's rapid. Well, because we want it to be.
Well, think again, God used to represent people, this kind of people, strong people, the strength of the people, everything aggressive and thirsty for power in the soul of people. That was the good God. We call that the God of imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
Now the God represents our incapacity for power, but he's still good.
We've forgotten actually to live or maybe put it this way, our God, our nation God has forgotten how to be God without a war, for example.
Yeah.
So then we engaged in wars again.
Exactly.
Because we needed them.
Right. And in fact, the way that Nietzsche lays it out, this goes to the point, I've talked about this on the other podcast, and I think we talked about it here too, is there's really only two political parties in the United States. There's the group, the collectivist party, and the individual, leave me alone party. The person who believes
we call those the undecideds.
Right. There's those who believe in personal freedom and self-determination, personal sovereignty.
Ron Swanson.
Ron Swanson. And then we have the groupthink, which is that whatever is best for society is determined by our group. So get in the group.
All right. And in that way, like we've talked about with religious ideology, the branding may change, but the ideology stays the same.
Yeah.
We have the same thing with political parties. They're political parties. They may have slightly different platforms, but they have the same purpose.
They have the same, motivation for sure.
Yeah.
But also then the same goal, which is, what's my future? And how do I maintain my freedom in the future?
Well, there is the sense, I mean, what Nietzsche's saying, I don't know if he'd use this terminology, but we would, is to say, okay, if your God's your idol, then your idol needs to serve you.
Right.
So then what you need to do is if your idol isn't meeting your wants or needs, then you need to refashion the idol.
Right.
And so this constant political machination to reframe, even things as basic as the Constitution. Like, how do you read the Constitution? Well, you have to read it very differently, depending on what you're trying to get out of it.
Correct.
Or what you're trying to use it for.
Back to your point too, this goes to what he's talking about, the will to power. We started off talking about this, and he comes back to it. When you ask people the question who are intelligent and listen and pay attention and go, well, what's the real purpose and goal of the progressive movement, for example?
Yeah.
It's power. Well, what's the goal of individuals who want to maintain their sovereignty over and against these groups? It's power.
Yeah.
It's literally what Nietzsche is describing as the will to power.
Right. And neither of them are actually purely individualistic.
No.
Because even the individual will to power is framed as, let's do it together.
Right. But it's still the power of the group then.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
To bring this into a more practical setting for the listeners, there is a difference between the weaker brethren and the weaker brethren. There are those who will come to you under the guise of being the weaker brother who are attempting to manipulate you in order to gain power over you by playing the weaker brother card.
I don't think that's a uniquely, Midwestern passive-aggressive tactic.
No, it's human nature.
Yeah,
it's just within the context of the church, that's how it comes disguised.
Correct.
And I put it this way. In my experience as a pastor, the weaker brother never appeals to that argument because they are the weaker brother. They usually make a confession of their weakness in the form of despair, hopelessness, concern, fear. It comes out as a confession of, and however they're being put down, pushed down, bullied, oppressed, however you want to say it.
Right.
It's never, Pastor, will you go talk to them because I am the weaker brother in this situation? And personally, it doesn't come out like that. When people come to me and they play that card, just put it right on the table, I'm the weaker brother. That's
a power play.
It's 100% a power play in my experience because the body language and the tone of their voice and the fact that they immediately go to that shows that, one, this is premeditated. They've thought this through.
Right.
They've formulated an argument and they want to use me as their proxy.
I hear what you're saying, but
yeah,
I'm actually the authority here.
That's the will to power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We see the will to power in human tradition, and I think that's really what he's trying to point out too here.
Right. And Nietzsche would argue that that will to power exercised by the individual is a good thing for him.
Yes.
Right. And the way that it's destructive to institutions, in his estimation, is good, actually.
Right.
Now at this point.
Right.
He needs to promote that because you have too much capitulation to external power. Yeah, state. Or even church. Or the state church.
Hand in glove with the state.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to Aphorism 2 then, to review, what is good, he writes? Whatever augments the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man.
Right.
So what is morally good? Strength.
Whatever makes you individually stronger.
Yes. Well, what is evil then? Well, whatever springs from weakness. So what is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome. Not contentment, but more power. Not peace at any price, but war. Not virtue, but efficiency. Virtue in the Renaissance sense, not virtue in the free, in the moral acid sense.
Right.
The weak and the botched shall perish. First principle of our charity, and one should help them to it. What is more harmful than any vice? Practical sympathy for the botched and the weak, i.e. Christianity.
Because it makes you weaker if you try to help them.
Exactly.
You have to get down in the pit with them. Yeah.
So what is good? Strength. What is bad? Anything that springs from weakness. What is happiness? More strength.
Do you think this is Nietzsche self-justifying?
Well, of course.
I mean,
all philosophy is self-justifying.
He's rejected the state. He's rejected the church. And I'm not sure maybe he is, I haven't read enough to know, but maybe he's not quite sure that was the right move, or at least it has cost, right? There is political cost.
Sure.
To rejecting both church and state.
Right.
Or the state church, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to say, no, this is because it makes me better.
Right.
I'm a better person because of this. And anyone who embraces this power makes it,
At this time, too, there was something called German Quietism that had taken root, especially amongst the chaplains who ministered to the government officials and military and so forth and so on, which was basically, if you go back and read Zephaniah, it's very much the same quietism, which is the priests preach peace and the politicians preach peace and the prophets parrot what the politicians and the priests say. And yet, as Zephaniah points out, there's actually no peace. It's actually the opposite. There's an army outside your gates.
There's observable peace, maybe, but not.
It's manufactured.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like I was saying about Nietzsche having the luxury of talking about this stuff because he's not technically in the food chain. He's not out there in the woods having to hunt. So it's really easy to argue for reality. And he, like we've noted, he did live through a war. But after the fact, it's quite easy for him to make these arguments because he's not really under a threat. He has the freedom to sit down and write aphorisms instead of having to go out and find food.
So, yeah, Nietzsche's the guy who's telling everybody how to handle a viral outbreak while he sits in the comfort of his living room.
And offers no solutions.
Well, he doesn't even care.
Right.
Because it's all about me.
Right. I was going to say, there's a purity to Nietzsche's philosophy at this point because he does just run it right to its logical end.
It's pure narcissism, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what philosophy is.
Self-worship?
Yeah. What is wisdom? I mean, that's the question, right? That's the question of Ecclesiastes. Kohelet asked the question, that's the whole meditation of Ecclesiastes.
Whatever's best to me, I guess.
Well, for Ecclesiastes, it's to be satisfied with what you have in the present. Be satisfied with what you have because it's from God. Period. Done. End. Wrap it up.
Yeah.
Again, Kohelet doesn't offer you a solution. He just says, true wisdom from God is to be satisfied with what you have today because you're going to die tomorrow. That's it. End of story. Be satisfied with what you have today. Move on now.
Yeah, right.
Versus, I wouldn't say versus. Comparatively then, Nietzsche is essentially saying none of this actually means anything. So be satisfied with basically pursuing individual power, individual strength,
which is good for him. Yeah.
Which is good for him, and therefore it's good for you. Because you can't rely on the state, and you can't rely on religion. And you can't trust society then, because society has been cowed by politics and religion, because they're one and the same, they're hand in glove.
Yeah.
So when the priest says, be at peace, there is peace in my soul. And when the politician gets up and says, I can offer you peace if you reelect me, or you follow me, or you allow this to happen. And that, again, love everybody, and be a good person. All of these things, and oh, by the way, not only publicly but privately embrace these virtues, which Nietzsche just argued are not virtues, actually, they're vices, they're moral acid. What are the priests and politicians doing? Well, to use his language, they're eroding the foundation of both the state and the church and the family.
Which is the strength of the individual.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so empower the individual would be his language.
Yeah, so Nietzsche, in a certain sense, is kind of he would be a very beneficial guru for a lot of people right now.
Like, use your brain.
Yeah.
Be honest to yourself about who you are. You know?
Right.
Huh.
And be honest about who you are in relation to society, church, state, and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, that's part of being honest that I don't know that he entirely is.
No, but I had this conversation last Thursday with a group of pastors where I pointed out that the new atheists are not like the new atheists when I was in college.
No.
That the atheists that I encounter today, they don't believe in anything. It's not that they don't believe in the Christian God or in religion. They don't believe in anything.
Yeah.
So you can't have the conversation because they don't even embrace metaphysics.
There's nothing apart from what is...
No, so you can't even have a conversation about good and evil on a moral level because those are metaphysical categories.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, you can't touch, taste, feel
those. To them,
those.
good and evil are just trends. They're social constructs.
What's good for you is not good for me. It's a postmodern move, I suppose.
It is. In a sense, Marx actually won the war on this one.
Well, and that's what I was thinking is that Nietzsche, I mean, he does set us up for postmodernism pretty well.
Yeah, he does.
And I think I mentioned that in our first episode on Nietzsche back 120, and how the Derrida and Foucault and the postmodern thinkers,
the deconstructionists,
they latched onto Nietzsche hard.
Yeah.
Because they love this radical individualism that he's promoting and the strength of the individual. So what's true for me doesn't have to be true for you, but how dare you tell me if it isn't?
Well, that's the analogy that my systematics professor used to explain Nietzsche to kids is, here's how this works. We're at the dinner table and I tell you, you have to eat your green beans. And you say, I don't like green beans. I hate the taste. And you say to them, listen, you're going to eat those green beans because they're good for you. And then the kid says, okay, but what's good for you and what tastes good to you isn't necessarily what I think is good and what tastes good to me. And so I'm not going to eat these green beans. So then you as a parent say, if you don't eat those green beans, I'm going to yank you out of that chair, spank you, and send you to your room without dinner. That's Nietzsche. Because in the end, the only thing that will allow you to enforce your will on another person is violence, is the fact that you are stronger than your child.
Right. So you can say that you don't like it, and it doesn't matter because I'm telling you.
It doesn't matter. Exactly.
What has to be here.
You're going to like it because I said so.
Or at least you're going to eat it.
Right. Which is why I still don't eat fruit cocktail to this day.
Really? Eggplant, and I got sick on eggplant. I got to think what else. Oh, tomatoes, actually.
Just plain old tomatoes, raw tomatoes?
Yeah, fresh tomatoes, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was forced.
So no, it doesn't work.
Also,
your parents forcing you to like things.
Cooked mushrooms was that way too. And they were wonderful. Yeah. We had picked them and everything. I'm sure they were great mushrooms. I don't know that they were cooked well. Boiled vegetables too. Oh, I cannot stand boiled
I can't stand boiled vegetables either.
Starchy ones, everything. Yeah, non-starchy ones, no thank you.
Can't do it. So that being said, a little glimpse into our scarred past. God used to represent a certain kind of people.
Yeah.
Now he represents the opposite. But I actually preached about this in my sermon yesterday on Satan, in convincing us, and I mentioned this in the last episode, that the greatest trick the devil has ever pulled is convincing us he doesn't exist. So when we talk about evil, we talk about it like it's a thing.
Yeah.
And that it's a fad. Like I said, it's a trend. And so what's good today, well, take for example, prostitution.
Sure.
Prostitution used to be universally labeled not good, a moral evil. Now it's legal in some states.
Although it does seem to be almost universally practiced among the fathers in the Old Testament. That's a side note.
Valid point. Valid point.
Side note. I mean, God certainly speaks
right. Sidebar
against whoring, but Judah and Tamar or whoever, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wait a minute. Why did the king, quote unquote, of Jericho expect that the foreigners had been to that house.
Right, exactly.
Like they didn't come through the city gate, but they came through her house. Why would he expect that?
Right.
Oh, all the foreigners show up for her.
And go straight to the
whorehouse.
prostitute.
Yeah.
Yeah, they go to the whorehouse. Point being, though, what was considered socially, morally evil at one point is now considered in some, well, actually, I would say society-wide, most people don't have a problem with prostitution. In fact, it's been romanticized in movies and TV.
I was going to say it's virtualized through media, electronic media.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's no physical contact, which makes it less dangerous, I guess.
Right. Makes it okay.
Less
quote,
consequential,
okay.
I suppose.
Yeah, of course. That's the way we like to think about it. But the point is that we'll find something like that, or, drugs that come in and out of legality, or, again, marijuana, medicinally legal in my state, recreational legal in another state, illegal in yet another state. Well, which is it? Is it morally evil or is it morally good? Well, it depends on what state you're in.
Not everybody's on board with that.
Right. And so when we think of evil that way, and there is no universal moral principle that is evil and good, like I said, then we can't have that conversation because it doesn't exist outside of, well, that's just the social trends. And at one time, alcohol was illegal. And look how that turned out.
Yeah. Whereas the scriptures do give some absolutism, right? A few things here and there.
Yeah.
I was thinking,
just because the Old Testament fathers liked prostitutes doesn't actually make it legit.
Yeah. Because we have the commandment for one thing. Then you also have the, I do not desire the death of the wicked. I mean,
right,
God himself defines that that's evil.
Yeah.
That the wicked would die eternally.
Yeah.
What's the doubt? That's what I said in my sermon. What's his chief aim is that your faith would fail and that you would die in unbelief. That's his goal.
You mean Satan, not God.
Satan, sorry. Yeah, let's be clear.
You made a jump there. You made a jump without a bridge.
All right, go back and understand it.
Pronoun
correctly.
game.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, that's the chief aim. A lot of this, it's interesting that as controversial as it was, maybe we should read it as Screw Tape Letters from Lewis. Mm-hmm. Where, it really is kind of a conversation about morality. It's a morality tale, but from the perspective of the demons.
Right.
And say, what is evil and what is not?
What about Paul Harvey? If the devil... that just popped up on my YouTube feed again, the Paul Harvey thing where he talks about if the devil was in charge or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And it'd be perfect. It'd be a perfect society.
Yeah.
There would be no crime. Everyone would be satisfied. It would be perfect because the devil would give you whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, and that's the reason for, as Paul points out in both Romans and Galatians, the reason for the giving of the law.
Yeah.
Is because the people were content in their unbelief.
Correct. And they did whatever pleased them.
Right. And they're perfectly happy with it.
Yeah.
Which, that's the problem with Nietzsche's approach, is that lacking any kind of external authority, then what is moral? For him, he would say that's actually a category you don't even need.
Well, I think he would appeal to the Renaissance, obviously, because he does, but also to as he says,
the
true
Greek
philosophers.
Yeah, the Greek virtues. That's right. We did talk about how he's really a Greek among Greeks. He
really is. Yeah,
going there. So,
and I think, and he does that in others of his aphorisms. He does draw that out about the different.
So he's not a pure nihilist then.
Yeah, no, but that he does draw that out. That for him, modern philosophy is too mixed up with theology. And he points it out that what we call theology right now is really just philosophy. And what we call philosophy is really, it's underpinned by theology. So we need to get back to the Greeks, which actually isn't true either, because the reason I like the Stoics is because there's so much about the God of love.
So he would say that theology for him, or at least at his time, is existential, whereas philosophy has become the supernatural. Yeah. And it's flipped around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but then he does say that theology, as we read in the last aphorism, is imaginary. So it can't be existential. It can't deal with reality.
Right.
Because it's all made up.
Right. Which brings us back to what we covered in the last episode about Christianity, even the present tense. Have we artificially separated out first article stuff, earthly stuff, God in creation stuff, from third article salvation stuff, words, water, bread, and wine, forgiveness of sins, and so forth, to such an extent that when people go to church on Sunday and then go home on Sunday, they don't actually see any connection whatsoever between worship and vocation.
I'm but a stranger here. Heaven is my home.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, in other words, nothing now matters. I'm just waiting. Well, I hope that I'm high when Jesus comes to take me home. Isn't that how it went?
Did I send you that this morning?
You did.
Yeah. Oh, no, I hope I'm stoned when Jesus comes to take me home.
There you go. That rhymes. That's better.
That's an actual song, folks. It's an actual song.
Well, it'd make all the Revelation visions
right.
a little bit more vivid.
He says, I hope I'm flying high above the clouds when Jesus comes in the clouds. But it goes to the point, and that song, funny as it is, that's why I laughed at the song, because I'm like, basically what you're saying is, when Jesus comes back, I hope that I'm not grounded in reality.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's saying.
Like, I hope I'm not really fully tethered to reality when Jesus comes back, so I can go home easier. But that's my point about what Nietzsche's critique. I think he's spot on in that what's missing is the incarnation.
Right. Well, which means then it's no longer, if you have no incarnation, then there is no power.
Correct.
Because what is the power of salvation for those who believe?
Right. And then I think Nietzsche would rightly argue against Paul, where he says that, God's strength is made perfect in weakness.
Oh, yeah. Well, we talked about that in the first 2 episodes.
And it's like, yeah, you're right. That doesn't make any sense. The loser wins. That doesn't make any sense. Giving up all authority, like Paul's statement in Philippians 2 that Jesus gave up all authority when he was born in the flesh. So when you ask, well, why is Jesus always asking the Father for stuff if he's God? Because he gave up all authority to be God. Doesn't mean he's not God. It just means he gave up that authority.
Yeah.
To be like us in every way.
Well,
I had to explain that to pastors last Thursday, since I'm on that.
Yeah.
I had to explain that to them. They're like, well, because we were Bible studying, he saved others, why can't he save himself? I'm like, he couldn't save himself. He gave up that authority. And they're like, where's that? I'm like, Philippians chapter 2.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're trained theologians of the church, and you're still trying to explain away why he chose not to get down off the cross.
We did the Passion according to Mark for our midweek service, and it's really direct, because that's how Mark's language is, right?
Yeah.
No, it's
youthis.
Yeah, exactly. So he says, Father, you have the authority to take this cup from me.
Right.
Take it from me. He actually just says it straight up.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. Not like, if it be your will. And then he says, but not my will, but your will be done. In other words, I've sacrificed that.
Yeah.
I know that you could take it away. I know we could do this a different way, but this is not how we're doing it.
Which is a great point that you bring up to wrap this up with, because Nietzsche's whole point is the will to power. And Jesus literally says, my whole will is to give up all power. For the sake of others, by the way.
Yeah. And actually to give over all that authority.
Which, again, then if we follow Nietzsche's argument, he's 100% right, according to his own presuppositions about Christianity. It's just that Christianity was completely wrong about how they were preaching the incarnation, in that they weren't.
They were trying to be powerful in the world, in the ways of the world.
Yes. Yeah, there you go.
To have authority over government, have authority over individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell people what to do.
Back to your point about the narcissism of Nietzsche and just philosophizing in general. Everything that Jesus does, the whole reason that he comes in the flesh is to serve others and not to be served. He says this.
Mm-hmm.
Everything about Nietzsche is self-service.
Yep.
Now take that, bring that into the church, and you have a church that says, subsume your own will to the good that is given to you by this church. This church will determine for you what is good, what is godly, what is sanctified, and everything that goes with it. Your individual will, your individual thoughts, they're irrelevant. In fact, they're against what we are about. Then go to a different church that's all about the individual. And about, it's me and my Jesus, or me and my God, and me communing with my God. And yeah, we're all here, but we all kind of form this social contract that we've all agreed to perform the same rituals and sing the same hymns and so forth and so on. But each of us is here for ourselves. That you have a church of narcissists.
Yeah.
Like as individuals, and then you have a church of narcissists who are latched into this groupthink. And yet, it's a struggle for power.
Yeah.
Over and against the God who gives up all his power to save us from ourselves.
I was just thinking about how, again, Paul's statement of what we confess is a stumbling block and a scandal, or a rock of offense to Jews and to Greeks, both. Jews demand signs, Greeks seek wisdom.
Yeah.
And this is not wise.
Right.
It's not wise. And it's not virtuous. No. And it's contrary to the Greek philosophy that Nietzsche is really taken in.
Espousing, ironically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's not a Christian.
No, he's really not. Which is
well,
why
like I say, that sharpens us up because we can hear. Okay, if you're going to be a full-on Greek philosopher, in the modern era, how are you going to look at Christianity? And you're going to expose all the flaws and weaknesses of our own application of what Christ taught. Good stuff.
So after everything, I think what we're really driving to is be more incarnational in everything that you preach and teach, in your prayers. Again, go back and read the Psalms. Go back and read the prayer of Hannah or the prayer of any of the saints, especially Old Testament stuff, and look at how concrete and real those prayers are. They're praying for very real things.
Well, how aggressive they are in their prayers, too.
And super aggressive in their piety. I love it.
Yeah.
And because the expectation is God is a mighty warrior who fights by our side. This is a God who is not tame.
Well, he actually was the commander of the angel, the commander of the armies of the Lord.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Destroying Canaan, the people in Canaan.
Yeah. So he's not this wallflower God, but this is the dichotomy. This is the paradox here, is that the one who is the Prince of Peace is also the Lion of Judah. It's not either or, it's both.
Yeah, he doesn't hold that tension.
Yeah, and Nietzsche doesn't hold that tension because the church he grew up in didn't hold that tension. They let it slip. And that, like I've said before, I think the temptation in every generation is to let it slip.
Law and gospel.
Yeah, law and gospel, God hidden revealed, theology of glory versus theologians of the cross.
Kingdom of the world.
Jesus incarnate versus the Gnostic Jesus.
Yeah. God in flesh versus God in the abstract, right?
Right. And like I've said too, if you want to see where this starts, listen to someone teach on the sacraments, and you'll figure out pretty quick whether they reject Christ or not. Because if you reject the incarnation of Jesus in the words, the water, the bread, and the wine, you're going to eventually reject Jesus on the cross. And then you're going to ultimately reject God in creation.
By the way, this is why, just as a little side note, but every once in a while I forget things and then I remember them, and then I have to tell other people so I don't forget them again. This is the origin of the practice of confessing the Nicene Creed with the service of the sacrament and not the Apostles' Creed. Right. It's not like either or. No, I mean, we said Nicene Creed because of the way that it defended the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ. 100%. Is we confess this as we receive the supper, which is the confession of the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ for us. Yeah. So what happens, if you want to break it down, because we've talked about this when we read Nagel on spiritual gifts, by denying Jesus' presence in the sacraments, we're rejecting the third article of the Creed because it's the Holy Spirit who does this. But by rejecting the third article and the incarnation of Jesus present with us in the sacraments, we reject the second article. We reject Jesus on the cross and his actual flesh and blood, life and death and resurrection, which then leads us to reject God in creation, which is first article. Yep. We reject the whole Trinity by rejecting the incarnation. And thus all existence.
And we end up becoming nihilists.
Or at least Gnostics.
Yeah, that's true. And at least Nietzsche was honest enough to not even do that. He went right to the heart of it.
At least recognize your own existence. Know thyself, I guess.
So there we go. We're done with Nietzsche again. I don't know if we'll come back to him or not. I got Feuerbach on tap here, and I love Feuerbach.
I think we should. I saw that quote you sent. That sounds good.
Yeah, so maybe we'll dive into Feuerbach next time. I think we've covered Nietzsche enough.
Oh, I think so.
We've laid it out. We've conquered this mountain. I'm kidding. It's a joke. But nonetheless, go check out everything at 1517.org. Or is it .com? Is it .org?
.org.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I get emails, so I don't go to the website that often. But please consider looking at all of the articles on the website and listening to the podcasts. And if you are in a state that is essentially shut down on account of the coronavirus, you have plenty of time to catch up.
Hunkered down, as I say.
Hunkered down. And again, wash your hands, eat well, sleep well, take care of yourselves.
Which will help your immune system, by the way.
It does. It really does. It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
Yes. But anyways, thank you so much for everything that you do to support this podcast and everything we do at 1517. And we'll see you next time. Peace.